A new face, exploding without trace, and an exciting police chase. It's May 1991, and this is Yesterzine. I sometimes forget how long this show has been around. Experienced readers of YouTube titles will know this is the 65th Yesterzine. There's now a serious danger of Yesterzine being longer running than the magazine it's covering. Bad Influence and its 2 issues last month was admittedly something of a freebie. But this month, several coincidences come into play. It's May, so it's the month of Amayga, when all your favourite YouTubists and many of the terrible ones make videos that are Amiga related. And also, with this Amayga episode, YZ has officially been around exactly as long as Amiga Power, possibly the most famous of all Amiga tomes. So what better way to celebrate this coincidentally useful confluence of events than a return to the magazine with attitude? We can't do issue 65, mind, that was episode 18, and it was possibly the silliest one of all. You see, Amiga Power was an individual magazine. Like it or loathe it, it had a personality. They got an honour few magazines do, a proper last issue. Most magazines get, at best, a hastily written editor column saying, "Oh crap," and a few cover reprints at the back of the final edition. Amiga Power knew. Their entire last issue was peppered with the stories of the magazine's writers being hunted down by the 4 cyclists of the apocalypse, the only minor deities committed to a rigorous programme of consumer testing, who wanted them to answer for their hand in supposedly killing the Amiga as a format. Sections, like the entire Kickoff 96 review, were a stage play of the writer's trial for the same. And the reason I say you should watch episode 18 was, in classic Yesterzine over-the-top fashion, we acted it out.
It's literally unplayable, as would have been obvious to the most cursory playtesting imaginable, and it's been stuck into the shops anyway. That's how much Anko think of you. Would that it was only them.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, who cares what you think about anything? No further questions, Your Honour.
Counsel for the defence.
The defence counsel rises briefly to his feet. He is the 3rd cyclist.
No questions, Your Honour.
Well, thanks for this spirited defence, I must say.
Very well.
They were controversial. We spent at least a couple of episodes on it. The promise to only review finished games was not kept. They got in legal trouble with more people than Private Eye, from the British Legion to publishers Team 17. And it was they who made public one of YZ's best running jokes. That the mark you give a game if you don't think people should buy it, but didn't want to annoy the publisher, was 73%. The mark of the beast. But this month we're doing Launch AP, and it's a surprisingly different magazine. As retrospective site AP2 puts it, the AP everyone remembers is roughly in the middle half of its run, and while the seeds of a classic are here, it doesn't quite start that way. There's another reason though. Despite the fact it's episode 65, Amiga Power issue 1 is why we have Yesterzine. In a post in a long dead to me forum, we were talking magazines, and someone said they'd consider trying to play every game Zap reviewed in the order they reviewed them. I had a marginally simpler idea, and I used AP1 as the example. Coming up, there's the game Amiga Power liked least, and we'll see if the free cover-mounted game is worth the admission price. Plus, how licensed music for games went mainstream thanks to possibly the Amiga's most famous developer and publisher combination, and how it was really all a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. First though, what are the 100 best Amiga games? There's one big surprise to my memory in this issue. The Amiga Power Top 100 was an institution, appearing in the magazine every year of its life and updated as new games came out. Except the first one. In issue 1 there are tips for almost all the top 100, but not the 100 itself, and the reason for this is the full list only appears in a preview issue given away with Amiga format a month earlier.
Welcome to Bonus
Magazine.
Actual preview issues are fairly rare, and what to include is a decision. Do you mine content from the real issue 1, or do an original issue 0? Amiga Power took the latter approach, with the top 100 Amiga games being joined by a single 4-page game review that did not appear in the first real issue. And it's that which we're here to investigate for potential dodginess. But let's start with the top 100 itself. Weirdly, they break with tradition and start at 1 and not 100, so we'll fix that for a start. To calibrate, game 100 is Grand Monster Slam, a sports-adjacent title which Amiga format gave 54%, but got a solid 87 from the 1. Highlights include Gremlin's stylish Venus the Flytrapper 84, just pipped by the original Jane's Pond, although I will die on the hill the original is easily the best Pond game. 75 for Elite might strike some as a lowly position, especially as the same publisher's fellow open world pioneer Midwinter is at 66, despite, whisper it, the Atari ST version being unambiguously better. Take note too of Bombuzal at 57, there will quite literally be a test later. Xenon 2 appeared at 33, presumably because they feel they have to, despite their only gameplay comment being that it's samey. AP2 subsequently admitting that in a top 100 written by 2 people, but voted on by several, the writer would often try to subtly make their real feelings clear. The top 10 though. Stunt Car Racer, absolutely. 16-bit racers would never see more convincing physics, even if we now know it cheats like hell to do it. Indianapolis 500 was one of the first genuine attempts at a proper simulation of an event, rather than just driving. Falcon was one of the best flight sims on the Amiga without a Microprose logo on the box. Kickoff 2 was always going to be there. I've never been a fan of the groundbreaking Populous, but you can't deny both that it should be here and should be below SimCity, which appears the other side of Virus, a gritty and realistic simulation of dating your mum. And then you'd expect Speedball 2 and Lemmings to be in any Amiga list. The former would not fall below 12 in the entire life of the magazine. The surprise is number 1. Rainbow Islands is a classic arcade conversion, sure, but in that list of 10, I can't find a way to put it above number 8. Apparently, its absolute zenith position was mostly thanks to one staff member, who will remain nameless, but for our purposes we'll call Elliot Page. We certainly know Kickoff 2's failure to reach the top spot is half that gentleman's fault, because on AP2, Jay Nash tells us so. The one I wanted you to remember though was of course Bombuzal, which gets a full 4-page review. A brave choice, as the one and only game to cover, given that it was well over 2 years old. Bombuzal is a tile-based puzzle game. What we're trying to do here is blow up all the bombs on this level without blowing ourselves up, or indeed dying in one of the many other possible ways. There are multiple tile types, multiple bomb types with different radii, and later, even actual enemies. You can also fall off the edge of the level or run into several other obstacles. It does offer you one concession. A bomb will not blow up until you move tile. A collapsing tile will not do so until you move off it. To demonstrate, here's the correct way to do level 1. You're just blowing up bombs in the right order to make sure there's still an escape route from the last bomb. This looks great, in a this is clearly an 80s Amiga game kind of way. It's got that C64 but with colours look I'm not sure I can even define. I think the whole era aesthetic is probably due to the Atari STF still being the lead 16-bit system as well. Either way, you're not mistaking this for being from any other 3 to 4 years in history, are you? It impresses more with an isometric 3D view, although the game offers a top-down one and you should take it. The co-game designer Tony Crowther admits to Amiga Power in this very issue that the 3D was added to make it more attractive to magazines, and that he always played it in 2D, which gives you a lot more visibility of the level design. Said level design is top tier. Tony Crowther was responsible for Captive, and indeed the technically decent but nothing to do with the show Nightmare, and was still heavily involved in games as recently as 2019's Crackdown 3. The game includes levels designed by him and co-designer David Bishop, plus Andrew Braybook of Fire and Ice and Uridium fame, John Rittman of Head Over Heels, Jeff Crammond of Stunt Car Racer and F1 GP, and even Jeff Minter. Guess the 2 from that list who are going to be mentioned again this episode and win 15 internet points. So far, great, love it. Everyone loves a proper puzzle game, a nice relaxing time where you try out ideas and work towards the right solutions, fail and learn from your mistakes. And this is where Bombuzal falls down for me in retail form. because none of that last paragraph is anything you can do in this game thanks to some design decisions I find inexplicable. Every level has a time limit, so there's no time to think about your plan. In fact, not only is there a strict overall time limit and no pause function, you will be counted out even sooner if you don't move tiles. Which turns a careful, considered approach to problem solving into just try the first thing you think of and see how it goes, then try again a lot of times. But you can't do that either, because you also have limited lives, and if you restart, the gap between new level passwords can be as large as 8. So you end up retreading several puzzles you have in fact solved in order to get back to where you are and have another 3 attempts in a panic to solve the puzzle. Assuming you don't make any mistakes getting there, because more than once I had the game take a double input and have me sailing off the edge. Which is another thing. Why would you allow that? It doesn't add anything to the game. If it only happened after the slippy slidey ice tiles, maybe. But even that could be covered with other traps at the end. In retail form then, Bombuzal is something of a bust to me. But you should play this, on one condition. You get hold of the same cracked version I have that allows you to turn the timer and lives off. Then it becomes what it's clearly supposed to be, a puzzle game and not some feverish arcade trial and error panic test. It does mean I can't recommend any other release though, which is a shame, because as AP points out, there's a SNES version, and Americans are racking the back of their brains for why this looks familiar at this point. As always, they're treating you like idiots who won't appreciate a good pun, because for you folks, this is kablooey. It's a shame, because this is also one of the SNES games Nintendo graciously allows you to rent on the Switch, where it would be perfect if not for those pesky time limits. Although of course, rewinding and save states at least solves the lives issue. In cracked Amiga form, this absolutely deserves the 84% AP give it. In retail form, you have to question why a known harsh reviewer, who we won't name, but let's call them Charlie Martin, gives a 2.5-year-old game with obvious flaws such a high mark. The conspiracy answer is pretty obvious. In its first 2 issues, just sneaking in before the publishers agreed to ban the practice, Amiga Power gave away a full game on the front of the magazine. And for issue 1, it's Bombuzal. Now, despite the fact the reviewer in question is as trusty as a rusty road bridge, I don't think there's anything here. AP give this now ancient game 84% and a position well inside the top 100. Elsewhere, even on release, Bombuzal reviewed varyingly. The Amiga version specifically getting from as high as 92% in Zap, where they get the number of levels in the game wrong, to 49% in Commodore User. Although that review, much like AP's, reads like a player's guide with a token conclusion at the end. Unfortunately, Bombuzal never got any later re-release, so there's no more recent comparison from AP or anywhere else. Except, of course, the top 100s of subsequent years, where it doesn't appear, despite the continued appearance of multiple games below it this year. Conversely, the issue 2 giveaway, Kid Gloves, does appear in most of them, getting a higher position in 1996's list than it does here. The later lists were compiled in a different way by different people, which probably explains both discrepancies. Bombuzal itself was a commercial failure, although clearly not enough of one to stop the SNES port, or dissuade Nintendo from a re-release 30 years later. And despite its flaws, was a very decent issue 1 giveaway. For you, in 2024, it still is, so long as you play that cracked version. There are early clues this is not Amiga Power as we would subsequently remember it. Look at that cover. Later AP would never have put that many different screenshots on the front. Or that much text. Look at this cover from 3 years later, for instance. Other than on the disc label, there's not even a screenshot. In contrast, issue 1's attempt is less a cover and more of a contents page printed on the front of the magazine. It has sections for 4 games, 4 more articles, squeezes an extra note next to the issue number, which it also tells you twice, and still feels the need to use a sidebar to tell you about a competition. It's a mess. Imagine if I tried to do YouTube thumbnails like that. Oh wait, I basically did for the first 18 episodes. Where to start but the editor's introductory letter, except for the fact that traditionally that's the last bit of a magazine issue to be written. But it lets us see what AP stood for. They're going to review every game that comes out. There's going to be none of that every game gets 80% nonsense. And there's going to be no tech stuff or anything about pop stars, clothes or comics. It's a good thing they're not doing techie stuff, because inside of this very column they say Paul Shirley is quitting 16-bit programming to work on the Sega Mega Drive, about which I'll let my own Mega Drive have the final say. Anyway, can't stop. I'm quitting writing about magazines to go tell you more about this issue of Amiga Power. In interesting news stories, an early view of Sensible Software. At this point, they were known on C64 for Whizball, and known to football game nerds for being behind the underrated Microprose Soccer, the first football game I know of with aftertouch. But all they had on Amiga was the uninteresting International 3D Tennis. Megalomania, a game known in America by a name so stupid I'm not even going to say it, was the game that changed that. With a lack of reference points, Amiga Power compare it to Populous, but these days we'd call it an early real-time strategy title, beating the famous Dune 2 game by a full year. MLM would get 90% reviews from almost everyone, including AP towards the end of the year. With their next 3 games, WizKid, Sensible Soccer and Cannon Fodder cementing them as possibly the single most celebrated Amiga developers of all. Their rivals appeared to have already thrown in the towel. With Kickoff 2 completed, the last non-shit Kickoff game, Deanie and Screech had already moved on to a basketball game called Tip-Off. I'd never heard of this and had to check it ever came out. The answer is apparently, sort of. As Moby Games claims the Amiga version was yanked because of a bunch of bugs that Amiga We Only Review Finished Games Power would miss in their review the next year.
Hello, Editor Dudley here, just popping in to say I tried to capture some footage of this game and they are not kidding about those bugs. This is the opposition trying to take a shot with it continually bouncing off the hoop. I am not touching any controls and it stays like this for about 2 minutes.
By this point, Deanie had already left to work on Goal, and Screech would work on increasingly awful football games for the next decade. A fitting punishment. Speaking of things that might deserve a punishment, another reason AP1 is not AP. Remember what Matt said just 2 minutes ago? There's not going to be a run of 80%? The top score in this issue is Exile at 89%, but that's a close old battle because Cybercon 3 gets 88%. And so does Eye of the Beholder. And so does Gem X. And so does PGA Tour Golf. It's okay though, AP1 does give out other scores. For instance, Armageddon gets 87%. And so does Gods. For a magazine that would later claim 50% was a strict average, less than 1 in 10 games scores below it. The usual excuse proffered by magazines at this point is they pick and choose what to review, so their average is a fake average, and I'd accept that if some editor hadn't very recently said they were going to review every game that comes out. The other thing Amiga Power largely cut out later was features with developers, or as AP2 would later put it, interviews with people in the software industry of interest only to other people in the software industry. This issue has a pair of them, but also this article, What Amiga Game Do You Wish You'd Written? Which should be interesting, but ends up so dull they might as well not have bothered. 5 of them picked Dungeon Master, and it's probably not surprising that 2 of them are the 2 most prominent managers in the list. The late Ian Hetherington, founder of Psygnosis, and Peter Molyneux. Although of course if he'd written Dungeon Master, he'd have probably promised a procedurally generated Minotaur that turned out to be a rat in a fat suit or something. That he takes twice as long as everyone else to say this is enough of a joke in itself, but him having a go at Captive, right next to Tony Crowther, author of Captive, also raises a chuckle. The article fails because they're probably expecting a nice range of games, and most of them are just Dungeon Master and Lemmings. Jeff Crammond chooses Pipe Mania just because it's easy to write, whereas his chosen genre takes absolutely forever to do. Believe me, Jeff, I sympathise entirely. The entire page, though, is justified by this answer.
Kick-Off, because it sold well and it deserved to sell well, unlike certain other games which promise more than they deliver.
Who? John Hare of Sensible Software, about a year away from unleashing the game that'd then never leave the Amiga Power Top 1 and basically kill Kick-Off as a series. I'm sure this article isn't why. They had, after all, already released a football game, but wow, that's foreshadowing. We also get a free segue though. Tom Watson from Renegade picks Speedball, giving himself away as a business guy by being jealous of
generating that much enthusiasm with a product.
Rock and roll. The thing is, we know Tom is a business guy, not only because of this, but because Renegade was formed with and for the authors of Speedball, the Bitmap brothers. And if we didn't know that before, we know it because of this interview with them literally just over the page. Then new publisher Renegade had set up office with an indie record company, and this is no accident. It always confused Tom that people bought games because they were published by Virgin or Microsoft. After all, no one chooses their music because it's on EMI, do they? Renegade rebalanced this. On their game boxes, the developer logo was the large one. It was they who picked up Sensible Software pre-Soccer to form the Amiga developer Dream Team. And if you look at the various Renegade published versions of that, then the logo is small or non-existent, just like on your average album. If you launch the game, Sensible Software's logo is first. Same for the first Bitmap Renegade release Gods, where the bitties are prominent on the front and there's a small Renegade logo on the back. Except of course in the North American Mindscape distributed versions, where they insist on a change because they're gigantic squares, much like the sticker slapped on the front. The other thing to take from this cover is the prominent music credit, a feature of Renegade's games in general. Sensi's games usually went all out with their internal musician Richard Joseph, resulting in the iconic War Has Never Been So Much Fun and goal-scoring superstar hero, which I know from experience will be copyright claimed if I dare to play you any more of it than... A copyright claim is even more likely for Bitmap Brothers games. They were usually licensed music, in God's case from Nation 12, the pseudonym of former Ultravox member John Fox. Fox came here because after taking some time out of music, he'd released a single with Tim Simonon, a member of Bomb the Bass. And it doesn't take a video game expert to spot the Bitmap Brothers tie-in there. Which brings us to the backstory. The indie record label they shared space with was Rhythm King. And they didn't just share space. Rhythm King were an investor. They were also the record label behind Bomb the Bass. And if there is any indication of how much the music industry has changed, when Beat Dis debuted at number 5 in February 1988, that was the highest first week for a new artist ever to that point. Eventually, only Kylie was lucky enough to keep it off the top spot. The first number 1 for the label was the theme from S-Express, co-written by Pascal Gabriel of Bomb the Bass. Which explains another of the Bitmap's collaborations. Their forthcoming platformer, Magic Pockets, previewed in this very feature, would inexplicably use this. Which oldies recognise as a Richard Joseph remake of Doing the Do by Betty Boo and the Beatmasters, both artists signed to Rhythm King themselves. Suddenly, the entire run of Bitmap Brothers theme tunes starts to make sense. For instance, Speedball 2's theme was also done by Fox under the Nation 12 name. The Chaos Engine is a little subtler, merely crediting Farouk and Haroon Shamsher as composers. Together, you may know them as Joy, or the Joy Bangler Sound System, who were signed, as I'm sure you've guessed at this point, to Rhythm King. Renegade's founding came from several gigantic pieces of sheer luck and coincidence in this vein. The bitmaps were at Mirrorsoft, having had Speedball turned down by Virgin Games, something they must have regretted. This might explain why, when Mirrorsoft cratered in late 1991, Virgin bought the rights to their Bitmap Brothers developed games, and even re-released them on History's Greatest Console. Tom was in marketing at Mirrorsoft at the time, and having heard of Mega Blast, which Tom adorably just calls
The Assault on Precinct 13 thing.
Eric Matthews of the Bitmap Brothers asked him to see if they could license it for Xenon 2. Tom did, finding Martin Heath from Rhythm King, who was a gamer himself, and very receptive to such an idea, and Tim Simonon himself, who was more than willing to help Eric convert it for Amiga use. Tom, meanwhile, was getting more and more irritated with the games industry and quit to move into films. He near immediately somehow ended up on a project involving Rhythm King, who were then approached by a journalist in music technology to talk about Xenon 2, something Martin referred back to Eric at the Bitmap Brothers. And very simply, they decided to do something about it. Tom on marketing, Bitmaps on software, Martin and the label on music and an outside perspective. There's another revelation though. The Japanese are apparently buying up IP rights in the music business and films, but also in software. It's a throwaway paragraph in a seemingly unrelated interview, but it is foreshadowing. A few years later, Sony's path into dominating the video game industry would involve aggressive acquisitions, most notably Psygnosis. Between them and the following American and Chinese eras, that's basically what the industry is now. AP understandably ask, where does that leave us? Creativity is the answer, and it still is. The former Lemmings and now Grand Theft Auto developers Rockstar North? The North is Scotland. Codemasters are owned by EA, but they're in the UK home counties. Forza Horizon developers Playground Games likewise. Rebellion Developments, just down the road, are one of the few publishing survivors. Renegade feel the win here is to get the best creative people and give them the best creative environment so they'll do their best work. Anyone who has ever worked for a company of more than one person is currently cheering. Although at this point, Renegade is a company of one person, namely Tom, and their only client is the Bitmap Brothers. AP reasonably ask when that's changing, so it's not just a self-publishing outfit. Tom dodges the question a little, saying they'll work with the right team when they find them, and accepts, given this month's Gods is their first release, that they haven't actually sold a single thing yet. We know how that went at least. The first team was of course Sensible Software, although it was only the Sensible Soccer games that were released through Renegade. They would also release games from a small selection of other quality developers, such as GraphGold, Factor 5, and Terramark, best known recently for PlayStation mega hit Returnal. Tom says the best way to judge Renegade is on if they manage to change the fundamental relationship between publishers and developers, and given the constant depressing news of developers being built up to finish a game, treating those employees like shit, and then firing them all, you'd have to say that didn't happen. That may though be more of a function of just how much bigger games are now. There are 7 people credited on Gods, 8 if you count Nation 12 as a credit. The full credits of Sensible Soccer, number 12. I just finished Marvel Midnight Suns, a superb game minus the almost traditional modern game problem of a dogshit last mission. In one way or another, 1,692 people are credited on that game. And while some of that is the equally traditional modern trend of putting irrelevances like the HR department on there, there's probably a 100-fold increase on Gods, and not all of them will feel so close to the creative vision as they're designing the finer points of Tony Stark's dodgy teacher moustache. So what about Renegade's other expected problems? Will they attract the developers they want to attract? Well, they have the 2 most successful developers on the Amiga and people who would 30 years later launch the biggest console of a generation, if only physically. Will they be able to look beyond Europe? Well, yes, but almost always in partnership with those with bigger reach. And will they be able to forge links with artists in other fields? Not noticeably, unless tapping up Rhythm King for music licensing counts. And even that didn't last. Rhythm King as a label were folded into their distribution partners Arista before even the Amiga died. The founders, though, went on to found another label, Lizard King, who somebody told me brought a little band called The Killers into the mainstream. Renegade went on a little longer, but never really broke into the 32-bit generation, probably because of the unsuitability of the model. Their last and only PlayStation title was the Bitmap Brothers' Z, a moderately interesting strategy game. By the time of its sequel, Renegade were part of GT Interactive, which starts a train leading to what's left now being owned by Atari. The Renegade contracts, though, left the IP in the hands of the developers. Sensible Software struggled similarly to go to 3D and eventually sold out to Codemasters, after GT Interactive era Renegade refused to publish Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll. The bitmaps rolled on, although there was no new IP after Z, just remakes and remasters. A few years ago their back catalogue rights were sold off to, who haven't I mentioned again, Rebellion. It's perhaps fitting that Rebellion are probably the pragmatic version of Renegade anyway, and are currently the home of those other British, and indeed Codemasters legends, the Oliver twins. It's strange really. What we learn most from this is that while AP2 are not wrong in saying that lengthy interviews with people in suits were usually pretty dull, in the case of Amiga Power Issue 1, this interview, especially in hindsight, is easily the most interesting thing in the entire magazine. Perhaps understandably, for a first issue not at the beginning of a machine's life, the vast majority of the rest of the issue is reviews, and we'll play their most hated title shortly. The only other one that grabs attention is an instance of 73%. As you'll remember, the score this very magazine would later say is what you gave if you didn't really like a game but didn't want to get in trouble with the publisher. AP gives one to a new full-price title. We don't know the reviewer, so let's just use a picture of India Willoughby to represent them. The game in question is Supercars 2, and in this case they're probably dead on. You see, Supercars 1 is a very nice but cramped scrolling Super Sprint clone with some good humour. It'd get a budget release 3 months later where the same reviewer called it a serious bargain and a superior game to the sequel. They're right, I'm afraid. SC2 removed the handling upgrades while piling the courses with more cars. It's a racing game where you rarely feel you're racing. At the same time though, the basic DNA is here. There's a lot worse to be had in top-down races, even if you don't just look at the ones Team 17 would later fart out. If there was a single fact that tells you this is not the AP of legend, it's that our lowest scorer gets 40%. And this is that lowest scorer, Moonshine Racers. As the intro, while lovely, doesn't explain in the slightest, this is about running alcohol to secret illegal bars during the period it was banned in North America. This has real-world racing significance. When Prohibition finished and those speedy drink drivers had nothing else to do with their incredibly fast cars, they started racing them on places like Daytona Beach, and out of that grew the modern NASCAR series. It's probably why NASCAR has such a proud history of, to put it bluntly, people cheating as much as humanly possible. My favourite of those being Smokey Unick, who looked at the rule saying you couldn't have a fuel tank larger than 20 gallons and built one exactly that size. And also so many pipes between it and the engine you could put 25 gallons in it before the 20-gallon tank overflowed. Smokey was also the pioneer of nitrous oxide in cars, and, because he wasn't a complete fricking idiot, also designed crash barriers. Moonshine Running's a great premise. Point-to-point races in a car designed for carry capacity more than turning, with the police hot on your heels down country roads. The ingenuity of these lawbreakers leads to plenty of gameplay possibilities in a Need for Speed Hot Pursuit sense, and the times they operated in and the limitations that could put on technology could make the weaponry and such really interesting. And we both know Moonshine is not going to stick that landing, as we find out after we discover you have to swap discs after the intro, despite disc 2 already being in the external drive.
1 million years dungeon!
Leading to a second introduction where it introduces the characters, and it's about as subtle as you'd expect. The guy in charge is called Ike. The sheriff is Fat Sam. Your character appears to be his cousin, Billy Joe. Also, everyone has a dog and the sheriff's daughter looks like she's about 95. You okay, Petula? Is there a portrait in your attic getting younger? Or is keeping your dad in touch about any trouble brewing a harder job than I think it is? Also, given the quality of the writing and indeed the font, I'm guessing that is not a deliberate brewing pun. Getting into the game does pull you back to earth rather. It's not the quickest of races. It really wants to be Chase HQ, but in reverse. So, Chased QH, I guess? The problem is, of course, a pickup truck is not a Lotus. It's not super awful to drive though, it's just not exciting. With the road twisting everywhere, it's nice to see that unlike a lot of games of this era, it can provide a proper mini-map, although even the tightest corners are not going to cause you massive trouble here, which means the difficulty comes elsewhere. Some of it is my fault. The characters natter to each other up at the top of the screen, and a decent portion of my problems in the game come as I rather stupidly try to read it. The intended trouble comes from two places. One, there are police, and if they spot you, you might as well consider the game over since they are relentless and smash into you from nowhere until you're dead. Two, the road is about as well maintained as the average one in Buckinghamshire. Jumps, barriers and rocks litter the area, and a hit to any of them will make your engine heat up, eventually exploding on you. It slowly bleeds back down again, even if you've caught fire, but since the obstacles often come in groups, you can pretty much one-hit kill yourself hitting the wrong barrier. Survive this though, and you get to the secret bar. They didn't think a huge amount of the police apparently, because you pull straight into a building with a large sign reading "bar" on it, and they go sailing past you oblivious. I'm beginning to see how the bandit got away with it in Cannonball Run. Still, the bar also doubles as both our upgrade shop and the best argument for the outlawing of music in recorded history. In fact, let me just shut up. What is that? Somehow the composer is Richard Joseph. Goal-scoring superstar hero Richard Joseph. Doing the do Richard Joseph. Gods Richard Joseph. Rise of the Robots Richard Joseph. Okay, they can't all be winners. And in this case, it sounds like he dropped his copy of Octamed down the stairs. On fire. And then hit it a bit with a baseball bat. How does that make it into a commercial game? Despite this, I experimentally changed the option from sound effects to music for the main game. This music is a brave attempt to get the Amiga recreating the banjos of stereotypical country music, and it works well. What's interesting is the effect it has on the game. It's noticeably harder without the SFX cues, and I don't recommend playing it this way at all. The game itself though, even by AP standards 40% is actually about right here. It's not bad. There's a lot worse than this. Notably, 2/3 of the Amiga versions of Chase HQ itself for a start. It reviewed better elsewhere, as high as 84% from The One, then still a multi-format magazine. Their conclusion, that the game at least raises a smile, is valid, but they quickly articulate the problem I have, that it just doesn't lean into its theme enough. They suggest gunfights with the sheriff. They suggest the competitor Moonshine Runners should be more a part of it, and that's fair because I've not noticed them having a meaningful presence in the game at all. So yeah, not an aggressively bad game, but certainly a wasted opportunity, and one that a modern remake could fix to make something spectacular. On the back page, our sister show from another Mr. Show. By coincidence, the best beard in show business, Gouldfish on Games, is covering May 1991 in his excellent cover disc face-off series this month, and that means he too played Bombuzal. Find out if he had the same problems I did. Find out if he's worked out how to pronounce Bombuzal. And find out how other magazines reacted to AP launching with a full game at the link below. You might just hear a familiar voice. Yesterzine is brought to you by F-Max, the lightly sparkling fish drink from Aqua Vitae. It's an ocean of refreshment. By Canoe Squad, in colour. By Amiga Power, the album with attitude, still available wherever you get your Amiga Power themed albums, so long as that's 010101music.nl. and by the 4 cyclists of the apocalypse, the only minor deities committed to a rigorous program of consumer testing. Next month, everything is different, but also everything is mysteriously the same. Or is it? Or is it? Or is it?